A storm was brewing inside Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one that had nothing to do with the weather. In the midst of impatient travelers, TSA lines snaking across the floor, and the hum of overhead announcements, a single incident threatened to shatter one woman's dream and unravel her entire life. Tiana Rutherford, a poised and successful entrepreneur, never imagined that the day she boarded a plane for New York would change her destiny forever. Yet in a matter of minutes, she found herself clutching the torn pieces of her passport, her heart pounding as she wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Tiana Rutherford woke at the crack of dawn in her upscale Atlanta condo, an elegant space that overlooked the glistening skyline of Georgia's capital city. She was excited, yet slightly anxious. Today was the day she would fly to New York for a series of business meetings that promised to expand her luxury skincare line into international markets. For the last year, she had poured her energy into building her brand Radiant Embrace from a local startup to a brand recognized by major retailers. The trip to New York would mark the next phase of her blossoming empire. Her morning ritual was precise, a gentle yoga session, a carefully curated breakfast of green juice and protein waffles, and a final review of her documents. Everything was primed. Her passport lay on top of a neat stack of papers next to the gleaming silver folder that housed her presentations. The thick leather-bound folder was symbolic of her pride and labor, containing projections, partnerships, and brand strategies. Tiana had done her research. There was a direct Delta flight from Atlanta to JFK, departing at 10:30 a.m. sharp. Arriving 2 hours earlier was standard practice, especially for someone who traveled as frequently as she did. But that morning, little things began to go awry. Her usual driver cancelled at the last minute, forcing her to scramble for an alternative ride. Traffic on the interstate was worse than usual, thick with construction delays and the typical morning chaos. By the time she stepped into Hartsfield-Jackson's bustling departure hall, it was 8:52 a.m., leaving her with just enough cushion time to check her bags and make it to the gate. Yet as Tiana navigated the labyrinth of the airport, she felt a strange tension in the air. The lines were longer than usual, and stressed-out passengers fumed as they shuffled forward in slow increments. She tried to brush off the growing sense of unease, reminding herself that she'd never missed a flight before. Still, something about the day felt off-kilter, as though the universe was quietly warning her to brace for impact. After finally reaching the TSA checkpoint, Tiana took a deep breath. She placed her laptop in a separate bin, then delicately set her passport and boarding pass on top of her carry-on. She was used to the standard procedure, the monotony of removing her belt and jewelry, stepping through the scanner, and waiting for the beep that cleared her. But what she wasn't ready for was the grim-faced TSA officer who scowled at her as he examined at her passport. Nor did she anticipate the dramatic turn her life was about to take, one that would test her resolve, her dignity, and her determination to fight for what she had worked so hard to achieve. Tiana stepped up to the TSA officer's podium, handing over her passport and boarding pass with a polite smile. The officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and stern eyes, glanced down at her documents. His name tag read G. Hastings. Tiana noticed his mouth tighten slightly as his gaze flickered from her photo to her face. She had encountered her fair share of skeptical officers, but never anything that raised more than a mild annoyance. "Ma'am, please step aside," Officer Hastings said, his voice devoid of warmth. Tiana felt her heart flutter. She had done nothing wrong. Her passport was valid. Her flight was in order. What could possibly be the issue? A second officer, a shorter man with a quick nervous energy, joined them. He introduced himself as Officer Bailey. "We have a concern about your passport," he explained, flipping through the pages as though searching for something. Tiana's well-used passport had stamps from multiple countries: Ghana, France, Japan, Brazil, reflecting her global ambitions for her brand and her personal passion for exploring new cultures. "What concern?" Tiana asked, doing her best to remain composed. She was aware of the weight of every passing minute. She could picture the security lines, the glances of other travelers, and the clock ticking toward her flight time. Officer Hastings pointed to one of the passport's pages. "The ink on this Ghana stamp looks smudged." His tone carried the implication of wrongdoing. Tiana squinted, noticing a faint blur near the edge of one stamp. "That's from when I traveled last year to visit a cosmetics manufacturing facility," Tiana explained calmly. "It rained heavily the day I arrived, and my passport got slightly damp before I could put it away." Hastings pursed his lips and passed it to Bailey. "We need to verify authenticity," Bailey said. Tiana nodded, understanding their diligence, but felt the tension intensify as Hastings lifted a phone to call over a supervisor. As the minutes ticked by, Tiana's mind raced. She had never dealt with anything more than a standard check. Though the smudged stamp might be unusual, it was hardly a reason to suspect her of carrying a fake passport, or so she thought. She tried to remain patient, but the heavy hush that fell as the supervisors arrived made her skin prickle. When TSA Supervisor Jenna Cross approached, Tiana felt a small wave of relief. There was something empathetic in the supervisor's eyes. Cross reviewed the passport, asked Tiana a few questions about her travels, and then retreated to a corner to confer with Hastings and Bailey. Yet from a distance, Tiana could tell that Hastings was agitated, gesturing at the passport with more force than necessary. Cross seemed to be pushing back, shaking her head. Eventually, Cross returned and told Tiana, "We'll need you to come to a secondary screening area just for a more thorough review." Tiana wanted to object, time was running short, but she knew better than to argue at this delicate stage. Cooperating fully was her only path to clearing up the matter quickly. As she followed them to the secondary screening room, she could never have predicted that her entire life was about to tip off balance, and that she was on the verge of experiencing a betrayal she would not soon forget. In the dimly lit secondary screening room, Tiana found herself seated in a plastic chair that was surprisingly uncomfortable for an international airport as massive as Atlanta's. The grey walls closed in on her, as though the space was designed to heighten anxiety. She tried to keep her composure, but the relentless ticking of the clock in her mind, reminding her of her flight time, made it nearly impossible to stay calm. Officer Hastings and Supervisor Cross hovered near a small metal table, examining Tiana's passport under a bright lamp. Occasionally, they ran it through a scanner, then repeated the process. Cross asked Tiana to verify basic personal information, her full name, date of birth, the reason for her trip. Tiana answered each question crisply, determined to show she had nothing to hide. Hastings, however, seemed less than satisfied. His tone dripped with suspicion as he grilled Tiana about her past travels. Why so many stamps in this passport? What exactly was the purpose of your trips to Ghana? Brazil and France. Tiana maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. I'm the CEO of a skincare brand. I travel to meet with suppliers and explore new markets. Ghana was to visit a shea butter cooperative, Brazil, for sourcing cocoa butter, and France for a cosmetic ingredients conference. Though Tiana explained herself politely, Hastings kept narrowing his eyes as though searching for inconsistencies. Supervisor Cross gave Hastings a pointed look, signaling him to calm down before turning back to Tiana, with a gentler tone. "We're going to run a deeper check, Ms. Rutherford, and then we'll decide how to proceed. It might take a few more minutes. Please be patient." A swirl of apprehension and anger twisted in Tiana's gut. Her flight was in less than an hour. She had meetings lined up in New York negotiations that could seal her brand's future. Yet she found herself trapped in a sterile room at the mercy of a man who seemed determined to cast her as a criminal. While she waited, Tiana's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Her final boarding call was approaching in 15 minutes. She glanced at the time. Her window was almost shut. She swallowed the lump of frustration in her throat, forcing herself not to panic. "Could you at least let me speak with someone from Delta?" she asked, her voice carefully balanced between urgency and respect. No Hastings snapped. "We're not done here." In that moment, Tiana felt a spark of anger flare up inside her. She had always believed in maintaining composure, but the injustice of it all, the suspicion, the condescending tone was becoming difficult to bear. Supervisor Cross, sensing the tension, stepped toward Tiana. "Ma'am, I'll go check on something with Delta in just a moment," she said, offering a cautious nod of reassurance. But it was too late. Tiana had already caught the glint of hostility in Hastings's eyes. And deep down she knew that if she didn't stand her ground, this situation could spiral out of her control entirely. Little did she know, however, that the worst was yet to come, the moment that would ignite her fury and cast a shadow over her dream trip to New York. Tiana's frustration simmered an undercurrent of indignation she tried desperately to keep in check. Hastings had taken her passport to a corner of the secondary screening room where he continued to scrutinize it under the lamp. Supervisor Cross hovered nearby, occasionally whispering, presumably about the authenticity checks. The atmosphere was strained. Tiana could almost feel the electricity in the air. 2 more officers entered a pair Tiana hadn't seen before, adding to the claustrophobia of the cramped area. Their presence only amplified her anxiety. She could sense she was losing time. Her phone lay inside her bag, which they had placed out of reach. She could not even text her team in New York to let them know she might not make it. Suddenly, Hastings turned around. His face was tight with an expression that bordered on fury. "I've seen enough," he muttered, and then in one shockingly swift motion, he tore at the corner of Tiana's passport. "No!" Tiana gasped, leaping up from her seat. Cross's eyes went wide, and the other officers seemed momentarily stunned. But Hastings showed no sign of stopping. He gripped the passport's pages, pulling with such force that the protective cover began to rip away from the binding. Tiana felt a nauseous wave wash over her as she witnessed something so unimaginable. An official entrusted with the task of protecting national security was destroying her most vital travel document right in front of her. "Hastings, stop." Supervisor Cross's voice was taut with horror. She lunged forward, trying to wrest the document from his hands. But he was bigger, stronger, and quicker. By the time she managed to grab hold of the passport, it was too late. Pages lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves, and Tiana's personal information was mutilated beyond recognition. Tiana's mind raced a kaleidoscope of disbelief and outrage. She had never felt so powerless. Tears stung her eyes as she tried to speak, but the words lodged in her throat. A swirl of thoughts collided in her head. How would she board her flight now? Would she be accused of something else? Would she be detained? Supervisor Cross, breathing heavily, glared at Hastings. "What in the world were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice trembling between anger and alarm. Hastings stammered, his earlier confidence suddenly wavering. "I suspected it was forged," he muttered. It didn't pass my checks. I was trying to see if the pages were tampered with. Tearing up a passport is never protocol. Cross shot back, face flushed. She looked at Tiana and tried to apologize. This is not standard procedure, Ms. Rutherford. I am so sorry. Tiana's voice finally emerged, trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. My flight is about to leave, she managed, still in disbelief at the scattered remains of her travel document. How could you do this? In that moment, Tiana felt something snap inside her. All her patience, her measured diplomacy, evaporated like a wisp of smoke. She was angry not just at Hastings, but at the entire institution that had allowed something like this to happen. The humiliation was too profound for her to fully process. All she knew was that she would not go down quietly. Not after all she had endured, and not after seeing her passport, a symbol of her global aspirations, torn into shreds before her very eyes. In the eerie hush that followed, the other officers stood frozen. Supervisor Cross frantically bent down to collect the torn pages, an expression of deep remorse shadowing her features. Hastings, breathing heavily, stared at the wall, perhaps beginning to sense the enormity of what he had done. Tiana stood in stunned silence, fury pulsing through her veins. She had lost her flight, her business meetings were now in jeopardy, and her dignity had been assaulted in a way that felt deeply personal. Cross turned to Tiana, holding the limp remains of the passport. I'm so sorry. We'll do everything we can to help you replace this. The TSA will take full responsibility. Tiana took a moment to compose herself. Tears threatened to spill over, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. The TSA. Are you going to undo my missed flight or salvage my business deals? She demanded, her voice trembling with anger and sadness. Who's going to apologize for the humiliation I just went through? Hastings tried to step forward, but Tiana glared at him, her eyes burning with indignation. Don't, she snapped. She could see the faintest flicker of guilt cross his face, though it was overshadowed by his pride and resentment. One of the new officers who had remained silent cleared his throat. We'll need you to fill out an incident report, he said awkwardly, holding out a clipboard. Tiana let out a short, incredulous laugh. Her throat felt tight and her chest ached with grief, but she took the clipboard. If anything, writing down the incident might help her in whatever legal steps she planned to take next. As she scribbled details onto the form, her mind began to race with thoughts of retaliation. Tiana had never been the vengeful type she believed in rising above conflicts. But Hastings's blatant disrespect, coupled with the raw impact on her career, was too much. She had always fought for her achievements in a business world that wasn't always welcoming to black women. Now, to watch a piece of her identity destroyed by a representative of a system supposedly meant to protect her. The anger that ignited in her core felt righteous and unstoppable. In those moments, Tiana resolved that she wouldn't stop at a mere complaint. She would leverage every connection, every resource, and every legal avenue at her disposal to ensure accountability. Hastings would not simply walk away from this. She had worked too hard to see her ambitions shredded like confetti on an airport floor. Supervisor Cross handed Tiana the fragments of her passport in an evidence bag. Please come with me to the administrative office. We'll work on next steps. I promise we'll fix this. Fix it? Tiana repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. My flight is gone. I don't have a valid passport now. How exactly do we fix that? Right this second? Cross lowered her eyes, seemingly at a loss. Tiana scooped up her belongings, ignoring Hastings's silent presence. She left the secondary screening room, with her head held high, the embers of defiance burning bright within her. Though her professional plans were wrecked for the day, another plan, one driven by the certainty that she would not be silenced, was beginning to take root in her heart. She had lost a vital piece of her identity, but she would transform that loss into a moment of reckoning for those responsible. Hours later, Tiana sat in a nondescript administrative office near the TSA's main headquarters within the airport. Supervisor Cross was in the middle of an earnest apology, explaining procedures for claiming compensation and outlining how Tiana could obtain an emergency replacement passport. None of it seemed to matter anymore. Her flight to New York was long gone, and so was the opportunity to meet the overseas buyers who had flown in for the negotiations. Cross concluded her explanation in a hushed voice. "I will personally file the necessary paperwork, Ms. Rutherford. We'll do whatever we can to expedite the process." Tiana nodded stiffly, trying to keep her rage from boiling over again. She had scrolled through dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages from her team in New York. Each one felt like another punch to the gut. The world of business moved swiftly. Waiting was rarely an option. The few hours' delay was unacceptable, and the entire day's meltdown had cost her not only time, but also credibility. "You know," Tiana said quietly, "this wasn't just a flight. This was my entire future. I hope you realize the gravity of what your subordinate did." Cross's face grew solemn. "I do realize that, Ms. Rutherford, and I assure you Hastings will face an investigation. This is a serious violation. The TSA does not condone such unprofessional and destructive behavior." Before Tiana could respond, her phone rang again. This time, it was her longtime business partner and friend, Terence Johnson. She excused herself from Cross's presence and stepped into the corridor. "Terence," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "I've been calling you non-stop." "Are you okay?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. Tiana took a breath. "No, not really. My passport was destroyed by a TSA agent. I missed the flight. The investors in New York, did they leave already?" A pause. "They're still here," Terence said, surprising her. "They extended their stay until tomorrow afternoon. It's not ideal, but there might still be a chance if you can get here before then." Tiana's heart fluttered with a tiny spark of hope. "But how? My passport is in pieces." There was a shuffle on Terence's end. "I talked to Malika. She's a friend of ours, right? The one who's always traveling privately. She might have a connection." Tiana's brow furrowed. "Malika Simon. She's the investor who came on board for our second funding round last year." "Exactly. She mentioned she can have a private jet arranged as soon as you can fix your ID situation. It won't be easy, but it's your best shot. If you can get to New York by tomorrow morning, we might be able to salvage the deal." Tiana's anger and despair mingled with a surge of renewed determination. A private jet. It was unconventional and might be complicated with a ruined passport, but maybe, just maybe, the door to saving her business dream had not fully slammed shut. After ending the call, Tiana marched back into the administrative office. Supervisor Cross looked up from her desk. "What is it?" she asked, wary of Tiana's intense expression. "I need emergency travel clearance to get to New York," Tiana said, her voice firmly set. "I don't care what it takes or how late it is. Someone needs to help me fix this now." Cross stood and straightened her blazer. "I'll do everything in my power, Ms. Rutherford. Please let me start making calls." As Tiana watched Cross pick up the phone and start dialing, a glimmer of hope took root. Perhaps there was a chance to resurrect the day's shattered prospects. She thought about Hastings and felt that familiar tinge of fury. He had lit the spark of her downfall, but she intended to rise from those ashes stronger than ever and ensure that he'd face the consequences of his reckless actions. The heavy bureaucratic wheels began to turn. Supervisor Cross tapped into the network of federal resources contacting the nearest passport agency. Tiana found herself pulled along through a whirlwind of security verifications paperwork and apologetic officials who kept shaking their heads at the extraordinary situation. By late afternoon, Tiana was sitting in yet another government office, a special passport issuance branch located in downtown Atlanta that stayed open for emergencies. The building's fluorescent lighting cast a sterile glow as a handful of travelers in crisis also lined the seats, clutching their documents. Despite her exhaustion, Tiana's adrenaline still pulsed with determination. She had lost track of how many times she'd recounted the story. A TSA agent tore my passport. It was completely destroyed. Each new official responded with widened eyes and an exclamation of disbelief. Tiana watched them fill out forms, make copies of ID documents, and contact the airlines to confirm her identity. Every step was like crawling through quicksand, but at least she was moving forward. A middle-aged clerk, Ms. Patel, took over Tiana's case. Her tone was brisk but kindly. "We'll need your birth certificate, which your assistant is faxing over, and a police report or official TSA documentation describing the passport's destruction. Once we have that, we can issue a replacement on an emergency basis." Tiana nodded. She had called Terence earlier, begging him to retrieve her documents from her condo and send them over immediately. She prayed everything would arrive in time. Meanwhile, Supervisor Cross had emailed her an official statement from the TSA, detailing the incident, which Tiana printed and handed to Ms. Patel. By 7 Hazarul p.m., the wheels had turned enough that Ms. Patel approached Tiana with a faint, relieved smile. "Everything checks out. You'll have a new passport in a couple of hours, Ms. Rutherford. Please wait here." 2 hours felt like an eternity, but Tiana exhaled with relief. Her phone vibrated, and she saw a message from Malika. "Jet is ready whenever you are. Let's make it happen." A small burst of energy coursed through Tiana. If the new passport was in her hands tonight, she could take that private jet to New York overnight, arriving in time for a morning meeting. She would have a chance, albeit a slim one, to patch up her business deal. During the wait, she scrolled through her social media feeds, briefly contemplating whether to share the humiliating experience. Part of her wanted to broadcast Hastings' outrageous act to the entire world. But she decided she would save that for a moment, when it could have the most impact, perhaps once the legal proceedings were underway. Finally, just past 900 p.m., Ms. Patel returned holding a pristine passport. Tiana stood, her legs still a bit wobbly from hours of stress. The clerk smiled kindly. "Here you go, Ms. Rutherford. Brand new. Please verify all details are correct." Tiana examined the passport, flipping through its blank pages. "This means more to me than you know," she whispered. Her chest tightened with emotion, gratitude, anger, relief, and determination, all mixed together. This was a second chance at saving her future. With a polite nod to Ms. Patel, Tiana walked out of the passport office, new identification in hand. Outside, the night sky of Atlanta was dark, but the city lights shone bright. Tiana inhaled the cool air, pulled out her phone, and dialed Malika's number. "I have the passport," she said, her voice brimming with renewed purpose. "Let's get me to New York." By the time Tiana arrived at the executive terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the clock was creeping toward midnight. The terminal for private jets was worlds apart from the chaotic commercial side. No long security lines, no hustle of frantic travelers. Instead, the space was sleek and minimalist, with plush seating and hushed hallways. The staff greeted Tiana with warm courtesy, ushering her to a private lounge where Malika Simon waited, looking as polished and confident as ever. Tiana Malika called, striding across the lounge with arms outstretched. "I'm so sorry about what happened, but I'm glad we could make this work." Dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit, Malika exuded the same air of success and poise Tiana had always admired. "Thank you," Tiana murmured, swallowing a lump in her throat. She was truly grateful for Malika's help in arranging this lifeline. An attendant informed them that the pilot was ready to depart whenever they were. Tiana and Malika exchanged determined looks. Gathering their briefcases and personal items, they made their way onto the tarmac, where a sleek Gulfstream G550 awaited them. Its exterior gleamed under the bright floodlights, a promise of a swift journey to New York. Inside the cabin was the epitome of luxury white leather seats, polished wooden accents, and soft ambient lighting. Tiana marveled at the plush surroundings, momentarily forgetting the day's turmoil. The pilot, Captain Reese, introduced himself with a warm handshake, exuding confidence and competence. "We're set to take off in about 15 minutes, he said. "We should land at Teterboro Airport just north of Manhattan in under 2 hours. Tiana sank into one of the wide seats, exhaling deeply. Malika settled across from her, crossing her legs. "I've arranged for a car to pick us up. With any luck, we'll be at the hotel before dawn. You can get a few hours of sleep and still make that meeting." Tiana closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the jet's engines soothe her frayed nerves. She opened them to find Malika watching her closely. "I still can't believe what happened," Malika said, softly. "Have you figured out how you want to handle it?" Tiana looked down, recalling the image of Hastings ripping her passport. Fury coursed through her veins, but she held it in check. "I'm going to sue," she said simply, voice low and steady. "I'm going to file a major complaint and see that this is addressed at the highest level. It's not just for me. This can't be allowed to happen to anyone else. And I want that man fired." Malika nodded approvingly. "If you need resources or connections, let me know." The whine of the engines built to a crescendo as the jet taxied onto the runway. Tiana braced herself in her seat, heart pounding from both adrenaline and exhaustion. She felt a measure of redemption as the jet thundered into the night sky, the city lights fading below. Her career aspirations, her sense of identity, both had been shaken to the core today. But as she soared above Atlanta, Tiana felt a fierce resolve burn within her. She might be battered, but she was far from beaten. The Gulfstream landed smoothly at Teterboro Airport in the still pre-dawn darkness. After clearing the private terminal's streamlined security, Tiana and Malika slipped into a sleek black sedan waiting on the tarmac. The driver, wearing a crisp suit, wasted no time maneuvering onto a near-empty highway. New York City's skyline glowed on the horizon, gradually emerging from the early morning haze. Tiana felt a tremor of excitement stir within her exhaustion. She had always loved the buzz of Manhattan, its electric energy, the unstoppable pulse of possibility. As the car inched closer, she watched the first blush of sunrise gild the sky, painting the skyscrapers in soft gold. Malika handed Tiana a cappuccino from a thermos. "We have maybe 3 hours before you need to be at that meeting," she said, her voice practical. "I booked you a room at the Standard in the meatpacking district. You can shower change and collect yourself." Tiana nodded, grateful. She sipped the coffee, letting the warmth soothe her raw nerves. Still, she couldn't fully relax. Her mind flickered between last night's horror, Officer Hastings ripping her passport, and the looming negotiations that could define Radiant Embrace's global trajectory. Traffic picked up as they crossed into Manhattan. By the time they reached the Standard, the city was fully awake. Horns blared, cyclists weaved through taxis, and morning commuters crowded sidewalks. Tiana and Malika whisked through the hotel lobby, the staff greeting them with practiced politeness. Up in the suite, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the bustling streets. Tiana set down her bags briefly, scanning the stylish, modern decor. Every detail seemed designed to impress, yet her reflection in the mirror told a different story. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders heavy with stress. She took a deep breath. "Go get ready," Malika urged gently. "I'll make a few calls in the meantime, see if there's any last-minute updates." Grateful for the privacy, Tiana headed to the bathroom. Steam and hot water did wonders to calm her clenched muscles. She let the water flow over her, washing away the grime and tension of the previous day. The memory of Hastings' sneer, the awful rip of paper, it felt like a scar on her psyche, one she vowed to turn into a badge of resilience. Once clean and dressed in a fitted navy suit that exuded confidence, Tiana emerged to find Malika on the phone. "They're still good for 9:30 a.m. Malika reported, hanging up. "Terence is already at the building, making sure everything's prepped." Tiana collected her new passport, business documents, carefully restored from her bag and her phone. The earlier frustration and sadness had hardened into a kind of steely resolve. "Let's do this," she said, voice firm. Their car ride to the meeting was shorter, but more anxiety-inducing. Tiana's pulse quickened with each block. She tried to review her pitch in her mind, pushing away the intrusive memories of the TSA incident. By the time they arrived at the sleek office tower in Midtown, Tiana felt a sense of calm well up from within. She had prepared for this day for months. As she stepped into the glass-walled conference room, Tiana reminded herself that she was more than the victim of a humiliating incident. She was a business leader, a visionary who had come too far to be derailed by one man's reckless actions. With her chin lifted, she greeted the investors with a confident handshake, silently vowing that nothing would keep her from claiming the victory she deserved. The morning sun lit the modern conference room in soft hues, reflecting off the polished table. Tiana stood at the head laptop connected to a large screen. Dressed in her navy power suit, she radiated professionalism despite the emotional roller coaster she'd endured. Across from her sat 3 executives, representing an international conglomerate specializing in beauty and wellness products. Each of them had the potential to catapult Radiant Embrace into new markets across Europe and Asia. Terence, seated to Tiana's left, gave her a supportive nod. Malika took a seat in the back, eyes fixed on Tiana. This was the moment, and Tiana rose to it. She launched into her presentation showcasing Radiant Embrace's mission market, analysis growth trajectory, and the brand's unique appeal, sustainability, authenticity, and community partnerships. She spoke with conviction, her voice steady. The fiasco of the previous day felt distant, as though she'd locked it in a mental vault for the duration of the pitch. The executives leaned in, captivated by her passion and data-driven arguments. Even her personal brand, her story of traveling the globe to source quality ingredients, took on a new poignancy, underscoring the authenticity of her product line. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, followed by a flurry of questions. Tiana answered each succinctly, grateful for Terence's occasional interjections to reinforce her points with additional figures. Hours seemed to blur, until finally the lead executive, a Frenchman named Alexandre Dubois, leaned back and folded his hands. "I must say," he began, "Radiant Embrace has a very compelling narrative. We appreciate the thoroughness of your research and your vision for expanding into the European market. What remains is ensuring the logistics and distribution channels align with our capabilities. However, your brand ethos resonates with our target consumers, and that is quite valuable." Tiana's heart pounded. She could feel the tide turning in her favor. Another executive chimed in, praising Radiant Embrace's ethical sourcing model. They discussed final terms, potential adjustments, and timeline projections. The energy in the room was optimistic. By the end, Dubois extended his hand toward Tiana with a faint smile. "We would like to proceed. Let's finalize the contract in the coming weeks." Relief coursed through Tiana like a warm wave. She shook hands all around, barely containing her excitement. Terence gave her a triumphant grin, and Malika winked from her seat. They had done it. Despite the passport catastrophe. Despite the heartbreak of nearly missing this meeting, Tiana had sealed a deal that might define her brand's future. As they left the conference room, Terence whispered, "Congrats, partner. You really pulled that off." Tiana smiled, the weight of all the stress and tension beginning to melt. "We all did. Thank you for standing by me." Outside the building, New York's bustling energy felt invigorating rather than overwhelming. The air was cool, the sunlight bright. Tiana gazed upward at the forest of skyscrapers. She'd come dangerously close to losing this opportunity. Yet here she stood, victorious. Pride and gratitude mingled in her chest, but her mind couldn't fully rest. She still needed resolution. Hastings had torn her passport, an act she refused to let fade into memory without consequences. As she stepped into the waiting car, Tiana resolved that after she celebrated this win, she would return to Atlanta and fight for justice, no matter how long or arduous the battle might be. The media storm began with a tweet, just days after returning to Atlanta from her hard-won trip to New York. Tiana Rutherford sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and her thoughts sharper than ever. Her meeting had been a success, the deal was secured, and Radiant Embrace was headed for global expansion. But none of that dulled the sting of what had happened at the airport. She couldn't stay silent. With deliberate care, she drafted a post. "On the morning of my biggest business milestone, a TSA officer at Atlanta Airport destroyed my valid US passport without justification. I missed my flight, nearly lost a 7-figure deal, and was humiliated beyond words. My name is Tiana Rutherford, and I will not be silent." She attached photos of the shredded passport, a time-stamped boarding pass, and an image of herself holding the newly issued emergency document she'd scrambled to obtain. The post exploded. Within 24 hours, the story had gone viral. The hashtags #Justice for Tiana and #TSA Accountability trended nationwide. News anchors replayed segments from her interviews. Activists, entrepreneurs, and everyday travelers alike flooded the internet with outrage support and their own stories of discrimination at airport checkpoints. And through it all, Tiana stayed composed, but relentless. Behind the scenes, she had already taken the next critical step. On the recommendation of Malika, Simon Tiana met with civil rights attorney Kimberly Osei, a sharp, well-known advocate for justice in high-profile cases of racial discrimination and misuse of institutional power. They sat together in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Atlanta. Kimberly, dressed in a slate-gray suit and glasses perched on the tip of her nose, took notes as Tiana recounted everything from the moment she handed her passport to Officer Hastings to the image burned into her mind of it being ripped apart under fluorescent lights. When she finished, Kimberly set down her pen and folded her hands. "We have grounds for a lawsuit," she said firmly. "Multiple, in fact. We'll go after the TSA for misconduct, racial profiling, destruction of official property, and interference with business opportunity." Tiana nodded, her voice low. "I don't want just a settlement. I want this man held accountable." Kimberly gave a thin smile. "Then we file not only for damages, but for disciplinary review and institutional reform." Within a week, the legal complaint was filed. The document named Gregory Hastings and the Transportation Security Administration as defendants. Kimberly's firm issued a public statement declaring their intention to pursue the matter to the fullest extent. The TSA, now under pressure, initiated an internal investigation. What happened next was unexpected and powerful. Supervisor Jenna Cross, the very one who had tried to stop Hastings during the screening, reached out. She agreed to testify and provided a sworn affidavit supporting Tiana's account. In it, she wrote, "I repeatedly told Officer Hastings that his actions were unjustified. Ms. Rutherford cooperated fully and showed no signs of wrongdoing. The passport showed wear consistent with travel, not forgery. His decision to destroy it violated protocol and my direct orders." Her testimony solidified the case. Public support surged. National news outlets covered the case, framing it not just as a personal grievance, but a larger conversation about systemic profiling overreach and the treatment of black travelers. Commentators debated it on cable news. Influencers reposted her story, calling on the TSA to do better. Even members of Congress issued statements. One representative tweeted, "The Tiana Rutherford case is exactly why federal agencies need more transparent disciplinary systems and cultural bias training. We stand with her." In the midst of it all, Tiana found herself grappling with the spotlight. She hadn't asked to become a public figure for justice reform, but that's what she was becoming. Her inbox filled with stories from people across the country who had experienced similar treatment: a Muslim woman forced to remove her hijab in public, a black man questioned for traveling first class, a Latina mother pulled aside because her last name didn't match her child's. Each message made her stronger. Each story reminded her that speaking up wasn't just about her anymore. As Kimberly prepared for court, Tiana stayed grounded. She ran her company. She met deadlines. Radiant Embrace continued to thrive, its story, now intertwined with that of its founder's resilience. Sales soared as customers, inspired by her strength, flocked to support a brand that didn't just sell beauty, but embodied it through courage. And though the lawsuit's outcome remained pending, something had already changed. Officer Hastings had been placed on unpaid leave. An internal TSA memo leaked to the press revealed he was the subject of 3 prior complaints, all quietly dismissed. Now the scrutiny was public. Now the agency had to answer. One evening, sitting beside Terence and Malika after a Radiant Embrace strategy meeting, Tiana spoke softly. "I'm not the same woman who walked into that airport." "No," Malika said with a smile. "You're something more." Tiana sipped her tea. "I just want to make sure this fight means something." "It already does," Terence added. "You've done what most people only dream of. You turned trauma into impact." Tiana looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. She thought of that moment in the TSA room, the sound of ripping paper, the disbelief, the anger. And now there were headlines. There was policy under review. There was a courtroom waiting. The tide had turned, and Tiana was not just surviving the storm, she was reshaping the shore. The courthouse loomed against a soft grey sky, its grand marble steps slick from a morning drizzle. Though the weather was subdued, the atmosphere inside was electric. Press and onlookers filled the building's halls, their murmurs blending with the low hum of anticipation. 3 months had passed since the day Officer Hastings tore Tiana Rutherford's passport apart at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. But for Tiana, the wound still felt fresh, etched into memory, not only by the humiliating event itself, but by the barrage of obstacles and soul-deep fury that followed. Today she wasn't just seeking damages. She was seeking restoration. Tiana arrived in a navy sheath dress and matching blazer, flanked by her powerhouse attorney, Kimberly Osai. Her makeup was soft, her posture unyielding. She wasn't here for sympathy. She was here for truth. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered with signs reading, "Justice for Tiana," and "Respect, not profiling." Inside the courtroom buzzed with media activists, curious citizens, and federal observers. The case had grown far beyond a single traveler's ruined trip. It had become a national conversation about abuse of authority, racial bias, and accountability. At the defendant's table sat Officer Gregory Hastings, his usual rigid demeanor now visibly frayed. His posture slouched, his skin pale under the fluorescent lights. Flanked by 2 government attorneys representing the TSA, he looked nothing like the imposing figure who had once stood over Tiana in that sterile screening room. Also present was Supervisor Jenna Cross, summoned as a key witness. She sat composed but tense, visibly wrestling with the weight of her testimony. When the session opened, Judge Renata Hill, a measured, no-nonsense figure with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice that commanded attention, called the room to order. Kimberly Osai stood to deliver her opening remarks. "Your Honor, members of the court." She began what began as a routine airport screening, turned into a flagrant violation of my client's civil rights, her property, and her dignity put off tours. Rutherford was not only wrongfully detained, she was humiliated, accused without cause, and ultimately had her legally issued passport destroyed by a TSA officer who operated outside the bounds of protocol and accountability. Over the next several hours, Osei laid out a meticulous case. Surveillance footage showed Hastings aggressively flipping through Tiana's passport. A still image from a second camera captured the very moment he ripped the pages. TSA internal memos documented that Hastings had bypassed standard verification procedures. Supervisor Cross, when called to the stand, confirmed under oath that she had attempted to intervene and that Hastings had ignored her authority in doing so. He went too far. Cross said, her voice steady but remorseful. "I said so at the time. That passport didn't pose any threat, and Ms. Rutherford was calm and cooperative. Hastings acted out of something else." I believe it was bias. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Tiana sat motionless, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her turn on the stand came after a short recess. She took the oath, walked to the front with deliberate steps, and looked out at the judge, not the audience, not the cameras. When asked to recount the event, she did so with clarity and emotion. I was targeted, not for my actions, but for who I am. I cooperated fully. I answered every question. I provided evidence for every trip in my passport, and still I was treated like a liar, a criminal. My property was destroyed. My flight missed, my business jeopardized. And why? Because I didn't look like who he thought belonged in the global traveler's line. Her voice shook, but she did not falter. I'm not just here for myself, she continued. I'm here for every person who's ever been pulled aside, doubted, humiliated, and told that their presence was a problem. If we don't hold people accountable for what happened to me, it will happen again, and worse. In cross-examination, the defense tried to argue that Hastings had simply made a mistaken assessment under pressure. But it rang hollow. The footage spoke louder. The protocols ignored. The supervisor's intervention disregarded. Hastings was finally called to the stand. He looked smaller now, his shoulders slumped as he faced the questions. He stammered. He insisted he had reasonable suspicion. He said the ink on one stamp looked irregular. But when pressed on, why he physically tore the document, even after his supervisor advised caution, his answer was weak. I was trying to confirm its authenticity, he said. With your hands. Osei asked, her voice sharp. Hastings looked down. I panicked. The judge called for a brief recess before delivering her verdict. Tiana stepped outside into the hallway, where Malika Terrence and a few supporters waited. Malika handed her a bottle of water and squeezed her hand. No matter what happens, she said you told the truth. You stood your ground. Tiana nodded, her heart heavy, but resolute. He thought he could rip up my identity, but he just ripped open a system that needs to change. Back in the courtroom, Judge Hill returned with her decision. In light of the evidence testimony and video documentation, this court finds Officer Gregory Hastings liable for destruction of official documents and misconduct. The TSA is hereby ordered to provide monetary restitution to Ms. Rutherford, along with compensatory and punitive damages. Furthermore, this court recommends disciplinary review and policy reform at the local and federal level to ensure accountability and prevent future incidents. As a final note, Judge Hill added, "Let this case be a reminder that authority when unchecked breeds injustice, and that justice, even delayed, must not be denied." When court adjourned, the TSA released a public statement confirming Hastings' termination. The media swarmed as Tiana exited the courthouse, flanked by her legal team. Microphones jostled. Reporters called her name. But Tiana paused only briefly. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said into one of the cameras. "But I showed up for it. I showed up for myself and for anyone who's ever been silenced." With that, she walked down the courthouse steps not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her future. This story of Tiana's ordeal isn't just about one woman's battle for a torn passport. It's a testament to how courage and perseverance can triumph over injustice. From the shocking moment at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to reclaiming her power in a New York boardroom and a federal courtroom, Tiana showed us that standing up for what's right can change the course of our lives and the systems we trust. If you've been inspired by Tiana's resilience, don't let the conversation end here. Keep asking questions, keep demanding accountability, and keep chasing your own dreams, no matter the obstacles. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories that showcase both the trials and triumphs of everyday heroes. Together, let's spread the word that our voices matter, and that justice, when pursued wholeheartedly, can indeed prevail.